Art is the highest form of hope. Gerhard Richter. Imagine a world where expressing yourself through art could land you in prison or worse. As we see the rise of authoritarianism throughout the world, I want to shine a light on 5 extraordinary stories, spanning from the Cold War to today, of artists who dare to stand up against tyranny. Oskar Rabin versus the Soviet Union. Bulldozer Exhibition, Moscow, 1974. In the shadow of the Iron Curtain, a group of underground Soviet painters staged an open-air art show, a brazen act of defiance against state censorship. For decades, only state-approved socialist realism could be shown publicly. In Stalin's Soviet Union, art's role wasn't to ask questions, it was to glorify the answers already approved. Anything avant-garde was forced underground. Oskar Rabin and other artists decided to risk everything to exhibit their forbidden art in public. It was held on a vacant lot, officially part of an urban forest in Belvayevo. Attendance consisted of approximately 20 artists and a group of spectators, and importantly, some Western journalists. The paintings were installed on makeshift stands made out of dump wood. As feared, the response was swift and brutal. KGB police, posing as outraged city workers, stormed in with batons, water cannons, and even bulldozers to literally plough the artwork into the mud. Canvases were torn, flattened, and drenched. Artists and spectators alike were beaten and arrested. One officer shouted, "You should all be shot, but you aren't even worth the bullets." Rabin himself clung desperately to a bulldozer blade as it crushed his paintings, an image that would haunt witnesses. It was very frightening. The bulldozer was a symbol of an authoritarian regime, just like Soviet tanks in Prague, Rabin later reflected. The emotional impact of seeing art physically obliterated was profound, yet the crackdown backfired. International journalists present sent word to the world, sparking outrage that embarrassed the Kremlin. In an unexpected twist, the USSR, stung by bad press, allowed a short-lived follow-up show, the Emilovsky Park Outdoor Exhibitions, as a token concession to artistic freedom. The Bulldozer Exhibition became legendary, a grim reminder that even a simple painting can terrify a regime enough to bring in bulldozers, and a testament to the courage of the artists who, under threat of violence, still yearn to be heard. Al-Ferzat versus Bashar al-Assad. Broken hands, unbroken spirit. In 2011, President Bashar al-Assad ruled Syria with an iron fist. As the Arab Spring stirred hopes of freedom, renowned Syrian political cartoonist Al-Ferzat learned how far a dictator would go to silence art. Ferzat was a household name in the Arab world, a satirist whose sketches dared to poke at government corruption and oppression. When Syria's uprising broke out, Ferzat's pen grew bolder, directly caricaturing President Assad in unflattering ways. The response was chilling. One August night in Damascus, masked thugs, widely believed to be regime militiamen, grabbed the 60-year-old artist off the street, beat him savagely, and then deliberately broke both of his hands. "This is just a warning," his attackers hissed as they dumped him bloodied by a roadside. The symbolism was as cruel as it was clear. They aimed to crush the very hands that drew the cartoons. Images soon circulated of Ferzat in a hospital bed, his bandaged hands in splints. The emotional outpouring was immediate. Syrians were horrified that their beloved artist had been maimed for drawing the truth. Around the world, other famous illustrators produced works in support of their fellow artist. Ferzat survived the attack and eventually fled into exile, his spirit unbroken. His case became a rallying cry, highlighting the Assad's regime's utter intolerance for dissent. But Ferzat's courage only gained renown. Even after having his hands broken for art, he insists on continuing to draw, proving that the artist's voice can resonate long after a dictator's warning fades. Ferzat was awarded the Sakharov Prize in 2011, a way of thumbing his nose for those who wanted to prevent him from drawing. Ai Weiwei versus Xi Jinping. China's critical artist versus the state. The walls of Ai Weiwei's Beijing studio collapsed under the government bulldozers in August 2018, a powerful metaphor for the Chinese authorities' demolition of dissent. In China, the internationally acclaimed artist Ai Weiwei has long walked a dangerous line between global fame and domestic persecution. A designer of Beijing's iconic bird nest Olympic Stadium and other sculptures like 2007's Fountain of Light, Ai turned into an outspoken critic of the Chinese Communist Party's authoritarian tactics. Through his art and social media, he exposed the government's corruption and injustice. In his piece Remembering, an installation of 9,000 school backpacks were mounted on the front of Haus der Kunst in Munich, spelling the Chinese sentence, "She lived happily for 7 years in this world." Or his piece, Names of the Student Earthquake Victims, a wall installation listing the thousands of student victims' names, ages and schools. Both works expose the Chinese government's refusal to release full data and have accountability for the thousands of children killed in the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, and how the deaths were covered up. The Chinese government's retaliation was fierce. In 2011, Ai Weiwei was suddenly detained at the Beijing airport, held in secret for 81 days with no charges. Police raided his studio, hauling away computers and artwork. The official pretext was a murky tax evasion case, but everybody understood the real crime was his dissent. After an international outcry, Ai was released, but his passport was confiscated and he was kept under house arrest, silenced and surveilled. In 2018, as Ai had finally moved abroad, the regime delivered a final message by razing his Beijing studio with no warning, scattering sculptures and installations in a pile of rubble. Through it all, Ai Weiwei refused to be cowed. He turned his detention experience into art installations, even sculpting the claustrophobic prison he was held in, and leveraged his global platform to continue lambasting China's human rights abuses. Ai's story is emotionally powerful because it shows a lone artist taking on a giant state, and even when the state tries to erase his presence, the memory of his art and activism only burns brighter. Pussy Riot versus Putin. Punk Prayer and Prison 2012. In February 2012, 5 young women in neon tights and colourful balaclavas rushed the altar of Moscow's Grand Cathedral of Christ the Saviour. They weren't terrorists or vandals. They were members of the feminist art punk collective Pussy Riot, and their weapon was a 40-second guerrilla performance. Blending political protest and performance art, they belted out a punk prayer, beseeching the Virgin Mary to rid Russia of Vladimir Putin. The audacity of staging an anti-authoritarian punk song in Russia's holiest Orthodox church, right under its gilded icons, was like a lightning bolt. Within seconds, security dragged them out, but the action was caught on video and exploded across the internet. It was cheeky. It was irreverent. It was artistic. And the Kremlin's retaliation was swift and severe. By March, 3 members of Pussy Riot, Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, Maria Ilyokina, and Yekaterina Samashevich, were arrested and charged with hooliganism. At their trial that summer, it became clear this was meant to set an example. The young women were denounced as blasphemers and enemies of the state on national TV. Despite international outrage, they were found guilty and handed 2-year sentences in a penal colony. The judge explicitly noted their act was motivated by religious hatred, echoing the prosecution's line that they had attacked the nation's spiritual core. Even as they were shipped off to far-flung prison camps to sew uniforms, their spirit inspired global protests from musicians, artists, and human rights advocates who donned colourful masks in solidarity. Pussy Riot's case was emotionally resonant, not only for its David versus Goliath dynamic, but because of the joyful defiance the women maintained. "They are in jail because it is Putin's personal revenge," said opposition leader at the time, Alexei Navalny, who later was also a target of Putin. Indeed, the harsh punishment was meant to intimidate, yet it backfired, transforming Pussy Riot into a global symbol of resistance and exposing the Kremlin's fear of free artistic expression. When the women were released a little early, in December 2013, having served 21 months, they emerged unrepentant. In interviews, they described the prison system's cruelty, but also spoke with pride about using their art as a weapon against authoritarianism. Pussy Riot's Punk Prayer, a messy impromptu song, echoed around the world, proving that even a minute of art can shake an empire. Atena Farghadani versus Ali Khamenei. Cartoons behind bars. Sometimes, even a simple cartoon can threaten a regime. Atena Farghadani, a young Iranian painter and cartoonist, learned this when her satirical doodles landed her in Tehran's notorious Evin prison. In 2014, Atena drew a mild yet pointed cartoon that depicted members of Iran's parliament as animals, cows and monkeys, to lampoon a bill that would curtail women's reproductive rights. This witty illustration was posted on her Facebook. The regime's response was anything but humorous. Atena was arrested by the Revolutionary Guard, subjected to intense interrogations, and ultimately put on trial for a litany of vague offences like spreading propaganda against the system, insulting members of parliament through paintings, and even insulting the supreme leader. In 2015, the court threw the book at her, sentencing Atena Farghadani, then only 28 years old, to an astonishing 12 years and 9 months in prison for her art. The severity of this punishment, nearly 13 years behind bars for a cartoon, shocked human rights observers. Atena's story, however, grew even more disturbing during her incarceration when she shook hands with her lawyer during a prison visit. The regime outrageously charged her with indecent conduct and retaliated by forcing her to undergo virginity and pregnancy tests while in custody, a form of abuse condemned as torture. She embarked on a hunger strike to protest prison conditions and suffered a heart attack before authorities finally moved her out of solitary confinement. Despite beatings and humiliation, Atena continued to create. Incredibly, she smuggled out drawings from her cell, using paper cups as canvases to depict life in prison. After a year and a half locked up, Atena was finally acquitted of most charges on appeal and freed in 2016. Her release was met with joy, but also a sober realization. In Iran, a young woman with a paintbrush had been considered so dangerous to those in power that they tried to break her. Today, Atena is free and still creating art. Her indomitable spirit stands as a powerful rebuke to the regime's fear. Her case is a testament to how a simple act of cartooning, drawing lions and monkeys in parliament, can expose the insecurities of an authoritarian government, and how the human spirit can survive even the darkest prison cell. Across these stories runs a powerful through line: art matters. Why do repressive rulers fear art so intensely? Is it because art speaks to the heart and imagination in ways that brute force can't easily control? I, for one, think art can unite people, preserve memory, and expose lies, undermining the absolute obedience that dictators require. Art versus authoritarianism is therefore not a one-time battle, but an ongoing narrative. As long as there are oppressive powers, there will be brave artists challenging them. Tell me in the comments who's doing that today. And once you've done that, continue by clicking the video on screen now.